Welcome to part one of our series, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news, you can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war. And maybe the way to get there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. We start with answering some fundamental questions about Israel in part 1, then Hamas in part 2. In part 3, we look at some of the history and how we got to this point. In part 4, we focus on past attempts to find peace and what went wrong. In part 5, we question why the world sees Israel the way it does. From there, we explore in part 6 some of the significant moral issues exposed by this conflict. Next, in part 7, we examine what's making a bad situation much, much worse. In part 8, we question whether peace is even possible and what that would take. And lastly, in part 9, we look back at the big picture to share some final perspective. In part 1 of our series, our focus will be on answering some basic questions about Israel. Here's what we'll cover. Episode 1, are Jews indigenous to Israel? Episode 2, are Jews white colonizers? Episode 3, is Israel an apartheid state? Episode 4, does Israel want peace? Episode 5, centuries of peace or persecution? And episode 6, is this genocide or self-defense? Here in episode 1, we'll cover the issue of whether or not Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. We've heard a lot of voices saying that's not true, but fortunately they're facts, so let's talk about them. Who says Jews are indigenous to Israel? Where's the proof? It's everywhere. The presence of Jews in the land of Israel is in the Bible and the Quran and in ancient Greek history and in ancient Roman history, and oh yeah, the ancient Egyptians wrote about the Jews in Israel. There's evidence in buildings and monuments, in historical artifacts, in city names, and of course you can find it in any encyclopedia. It's not hard. Let's start with the very ancient. The Merneptah stele, also known as the Israel stele, is an inscription by Merneptah, a pharaoh in ancient Egypt who reigned from 1213 to 1203 BCE. The hieroglyphics tell the story of Merneptah's victory over the ancient Libyans, but near the end, it describes a separate campaign in Canaan that mentions Israel. At more than 3,200 years old, it is the earliest known written reference to Israel. There are 3 other written records of Israel from the 9th century BCE, nearly 3,000 years ago. The Mesha stele, a Canaanite inscription, the Tel Dan stele, also a Canaanite inscription, and the Kirk monolith of Shalmaneser III, inscribed by the Assyrians. Here's a map you can easily find on Wikipedia. Look at the date. It shows the Kingdom of Israel existing as early as 1,000 years BCE, before the founding of Christianity, and 1,600 years before the founding of Islam and the Arab conquest. You can see Hebrew and Aramaic were the languages, and Judaism was one of the practiced religions. Islam's revered Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock were built on top of the Jews' second temple, some 1,700 years after the Jews built their first temple on the same site. It's pretty hard to say Jews are occupying Arab land when this is the real history. The ancient fortress of Batar is now called Khirbet al-Yahud, an Arabic name that translates to ruin of the Jews, which should make it pretty clear whose land it was first. You can also find the story in any encyclopedia. Khirbet al-Yahud near Jerusalem was the last standing Jewish fortress in the Bar Kokhba revolt of the 2nd century AD, destroyed by the Roman army of Emperor Hadrian in the year 135 AD. Before our modern age of misinformation and lies, even the Arab mayor of Jerusalem acknowledged that the land originally belonged to the Jews. Who can dispute the rights of Jews to Palestine? My God, historically it's your country. Consider the famous Arch of Titus. Standing next to the Colosseum in Rome, it was built in 81 CE to commemorate the Romans' victory over the Jews in Judea. Roman history is very clear about whose land they had conquered, whose treasure they brought back to Rome, and whose people they expelled from the region. There's no debate about these dates, just like there's no debate about the dates of the founding of Islam and the Arab conquest of the Middle East more than 500 years after the Arch of Titus was built. Another pretty clear indication that Israel existed long before the Arabs conquered and colonized Palestine is that Israel is mentioned 43 times in the Quran, which obviously means its authors freely acknowledge that Israel already existed at that time. Now, let's talk about the actual land of Israel. For the last 3,000 years, no nation other than Israel has existed there. Once more, Israel is the only nation that existed specifically in the land of Israel. There never was a nation of Palestine. No land, no borders, no rulers, no wars, no currency. It was some 1,600 years after the Kingdom of Israel's founding that the Arab conquest of the Middle East brought Arab peoples and Islam to the region. In fact, who we commonly refer to as Palestinians today were not a people before the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. This was widely acknowledged by past Arab leaders before our modern age of misinformation for political aims. One such reference to this was made by Zuhair Moshen, a member of the Executive Council of the PLO, in a 1977 interview with the Dutch newspaper Trouw. He said, "The Palestinian people do not exist. The establishment of the Palestinian state is only a means to continue our struggle against the state of Israel for the sake of our Arab unity. The truth is that there is no difference today between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. We do not talk today about the existence of a Palestinian people, except for political and tactical reasons, as the interests of Arab nationalism requires that we assume the existence of a distinct Palestinian people in the face of Zionism." Some have asked, then why is the land called Palestine, if not because it is the land of the Palestinian people? Here's why. The Romans conquered and expelled the Jews from their homeland some 1,000 years after the founding of the Kingdom of Israel, more than 1,900 years ago. To punish the Jews for their rebellion, the Romans renamed the land Syria Palestina, or Roman Palestine, in 135 CE, using the name of the Jews' hated enemy, the Philistines. That name was kept by later conquerors, the Arabs, then the Ottomans and the British. The name came long before the people we call Palestinians today. So to be clear, it is the Jews who are the indigenous people of Israel, the land that the Romans, Ottomans, and British only later called Palestine. And it wasn't just that Jews were in Israel thousands of years ago. Jews were in Israel 100 years ago, and 200 years ago, and so on. Thank you for watching Episode 1 in Part 1 of our series. Hopefully now, you have a better understanding and some facts. Despite the relentless misinformation, Jews are in fact indigenous to the land of Israel. If you'd like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. This was just a start. There's a lot more to learn, so please keep going and check out Episode 2. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.